Thanks everyone for coming back so quickly from coffee. Hope you're all feeling refreshed. We're on to my favorite topic, which is all about people. And we've got an amazing panel who I'm going to let introduce ourselves. We've Vievette Henry, Jenny Minogue, and Vanessa Hartley. So I'll pass to each of them to give a little bio of themselves. Vievette?
Yes, good morning everyone. I'm Vievette Henry and I am the Organizational Effectiveness Leader and D&I lead for AIG. And I've been with AIG for 4 years now. And in the program, picture doesn't look like me, that's Claudine McCarthy, our former CHRO, but she was not able to make it today, so she asked me to come and share with you what we're doing at AIG.
Good morning, I'm Jenny Minogue. I'm a chartered organisational psychologist in the Insurance Supervision Division in the Central Bank of Ireland, which is an unusual role. But my focus is on bringing a focus on behaviour and culture into our supervisory practices in a very practical way.
Hi, good morning. My name is Vanessa Hartley and I run the German organisation in Google. I have been with Google for 4 years, and previous to that I worked in a number of insurance companies, so nice to see many familiar faces in the crowd, and also in some banking roles here in Ireland.
Great, thanks very much, ladies. We're seeing a huge amount of disruption in the world of work at the moment, and it really has a massive impact on talent. So that's what we're going to try to explore a little bit in our short time together today. So I'm going to talk to Jenny first and around what the regulator is looking at from bringing out that culture report, looking at culture in organisations, which initially was related to banking, but I see that kind of moving forward into insurance. What do you see for the audience here are the skills that they need to build within their leadership, or how do they need to change leadership within insurance?
Okay, yeah, so the behaviour and culture review that we conducted this year was based on the retail banks, but there is lots of really interesting stuff in there for insurance to look at as well. So we saw positive trends, leaders adapting to the new way of working, but there's work to be done on the kind of more developmental side of things. We saw that there was a need to move from the crisis mindset to be a bit more realistic and to kind of stave off overconfidence in how quickly or ambitious change projects are, and also kind of around the empowerment of the mid-management layer. And what I'd see for leaders in insurance would be one of the key areas to look at is about self-awareness. Self-aware leaders are willing and able to reflect on themselves and reflect on the organisation. And it's not comfortable. We spoke about it outside. It's not a comfortable thing to do, but you have to become comfortable with that space. But through that, you can manage the change better. It's one thing having a vision to where you want to be, but to really achieve that, you really need to understand where you are now and the delta between that, so that you can make meaningful changes and step by step towards that. What we'd also like to see, I suppose, as the regulator is, it was the focus of this report, was a real having the consumer at the heart of decision making in organisations. And this doesn't mean that there is a team, or God help us, just one person looking at what the consumer means in the company. It's that it's built into your processes throughout the way. So when you're developing products, that it's not just at the end that someone from compliance gets rolled in and it's ticked, is it legal or is it not? To have that the real focus on consumers.
Great, thanks, Jenny. I meant to ask if you feel free to send in questions, and I'll pass them to the panel. Vievette, just around that self-awareness and empowerment, they're words we've been hearing quite a lot recently, but maybe not things that organisations have engaged with. I know AIG have done a lot of work around leadership and softer skills. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So as many of you may know, we got a new CEO, Brian Poirot, who is a former AIG employee, I think for 20-some years. He left, was the CEO of ACE and then Hamilton. And then we brought him back about a year ago. And so we have been focused, even before Brian joined, we were really focused on leadership. So in the past, how we assessed our leaders was, it was a one-to-one with, you know, a manager telling us this person is wonderful. But we took it a step further and went out and looked at leadership from the outside in. So we have simulations that leaders go through, and they go through and assess how they would manage a particular situation. And then we have independent advisors who assess them on their leadership skills and competencies. And so we built a profile, a new profile around leadership that focused on resiliency, self-awareness, having managers understand what their roles and their accountabilities are. And so we've been working diligently on that, getting a third-party assessment, so it's not a manager who likes you, who has the halo effect, that because they like you, they assess your performance and it's glowing, but really getting another point of view. And then having leaders have that focus around end-to-end accountability. So we redesigned the organization into 4 companies now: general insurance, life and retirement. We've got a new startup called Blackboard, and then we've got an investment organization. And so the leaders are, and the reason why we did it that way is, as Jenny said, that end-to-end accountability of really looking at the organization in terms of your cost, in terms of your proficiency from end to end, and having a leader say, you know, I understand that at the end of the day, the work that I do, how it impacts the consumer is really important. And so that self-awareness, resiliency mindset is really important, and we're continuing that work deeper in the organization. We started at the top 3 layers of the organization, and we're moving down deeper to ensure that that leadership profile is one that the entire organization is focused on.
Great, thanks. I'm interested in that word accountability, and Vanessa, we talked a bit about how Google approaches it, and you know, while a totally different industry, you do have the insurance background to look at. One of the things you talked about was, you know, people managers and putting accountability for talent and people into that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's very interesting because you know, leadership being the idea, I think, in tech and in Google in particular, is that, you know, we have people who develop our technology and basically develop all of our business assets, but actually we have leaders who manage those people. And so consequently what that means is that we obsess about leadership development, and that goes to the point around accountability where, for example, if you're assessed through kind of upward management feedback, so your teams are constantly giving you feedback that in terms of your leadership development, how you're leading them, what psychological trust you're developing in your team, that's built into your evaluation process. And to Vivette's point, also, we have constant peer feedback. So bringing the point on kind of self-awareness at the next level, if you're having a peer conversation or a conversation with somebody who's a skip level up, then one of the first questions they might say to you is, what active development are you working on right now? So it brings to the point where there's a lack of, we don't have to pretend that everyone is in a state of perfection. And actually, now it took me time to get used to that. It's quite an American concept, and as a very traditional Irish person, I was like, well, I'm perfect. What do you mean? What am I working on? I mean, I'm here, aren't I? So, but like, and it took me quite a bit of time to understand that actually it's far more interesting kind of building in that kind of learning mindset. Because again, going to the point where agility is the number 1 mindset that we look for in terms of our leaders and in terms of how we hire leaders. So ability to be self-aware enough to know that actually I do find it difficult to preempt and to embrace change. And therefore, I'm going to need to bring people within my team to help me understand what impact that change is going to have on our organization. But again, going back to, like, you know, my number 1 role, I kind of see it like I'm in an engineering business. My number 1 role is to be a people engineer. How do I think about getting the best from my teams at all times? How do I think about bringing the best cross-functional group together in order to solve a puzzle? And that's what I have to figure out all the time. So again, and we have a very, very small HR function in Google, actually. They're more organizational design and kind of strategic programs, whereas it is fundamentally how you lead is probably the most important attribute that you're evaluated against.
And it's definitely a different mindset. You know, we're hearing words like self-awareness, change, all words that don't really fit into the management concept, but much more in leadership. Are you seeing a reaction, I suppose it's more for Jenny and Vievette, reaction from kind of managers and leaders within the role about, I don't know how to do that. I've never really thought about that as being an important criteria.
I think it's a departure from traditional, like you said, management versus leadership there. I think that's a really important distinction to make, because traditionally it was about getting stuff done, getting stuff out the door, and managers need to realise that their leaders now, whatever they do, will be role models. Even if they're not setting out to be role models, they will role model their unconscious behaviour, their conscious behaviour. And I think it's just about, you were talking about kind of the leadership development. It's about bringing it not so much as a siloed, we'll do leadership development in Q1 this year. It's a continuous thing that has to occur.
Yeah. So we're seeing it in terms of, it's a new way of operating, it's a new way of working. And so leaders and managers, we're about to launch a Manager 101 because we recognize that it's a new way of working. And when you have a new way of working, we cannot assume that everyone will know how to do it. So, what are the top 10 things that as a manager you need to do and as a leader you need to do? And so we're about that. Things like unconscious bias, all the data tells us about, if you have a diverse workforce with more women, more ethnic diversity, that your bottom line increases 15% for women, 35%. So how does a leader who has never worked in this dynamic with managing a diverse team do that? We cannot assume that he or she will know how to do it. So we're looking ahead and saying, okay, let's work with these leaders and get them to understand what are their roles. Again, going back to that accountability, going back to putting diverse teams that have diverse backgrounds, diverse ways of thinking, and that you're going to get more bang for your buck by doing that. So how does a manager who's never worked in that landscape before know how when we can assume? So we're building programs to help managers do that.
And that's interesting about the diversity. And I mean, anyone who walks into Google will see it's an exceptionally diverse workforce. Like, what benefits do you see from having that? And particularly, I'm really interested in that kind of diversity of thought and personality, because we so frequently look at gender, ethnicity, etc.
Mm-hmm. And so, we of our 7,000 employees here in Dublin, we have 65 different nationalities, speaking 100 different languages, but and that with itself brings in an incredible amount of diversity. What we've always got to be very careful for, though, is the level of unconscious bias. So regardless of actual, race, gender, ethnicity, which we all still struggle with to get those splits right, attitudinal diversity is as important, right? So how do we ensure that we are not hiring people like us, and that we are not promoting and sponsoring and mentoring people like us? And again, that is something, that through our hiring processes, through our talent development processes, that we're constantly looking for. Because you can have people from all different countries and actually with different genders and ethnicities. And if they think the same, and if they think about the same group of problems in the same way, you're going to get the same set of outcomes. And so we really have to always check against the fact that, and there are things that we think a lot about and figure out how we can, how we bring people from different backgrounds into work all the time. And again, it's a constant. This again is not, I love what Jenny said, like everything is continuous. This isn't I'm going to do that in Q1 this year, or I'll have it nailed by Q3. Because actually, once you're scaling through your managers, like if I think about my managers, I have to make sure that through kind of looking through the data, that they're constantly thinking about those ways too.
And that can be the challenging part. I think, the area of people and talent is so grey. There's no one solution. There's no, you can fix that. It's constantly evolving movement. Just talking about kind of talent and hiring talent and attracting talent, the insurance industry, indeed the financial services, has probably gone through a kind of a rough time of late. Jenny, looking at you first, how do we attract more people into insurance and look to, how do you do it within the central bank? And how would you kind of look to insurance as a whole to hire people who have different attitudes, are coming with different skills we may not have looked at in the past?
I think it's the responsibility of the industry themselves, industry bodies, the educational bodies, to have a look and say, okay, why are we not getting those high-tech people that might be drawn more towards Vanessa's stream of business? And we hear time and time again that the millennials and the Gen Zs coming after my generation, we really crave a purpose in our work. And in some industries, it's much easier to make a connection between the purpose of the work and the day-to-day actions I do every day. I think in insurance, sometimes it can be a bit, there can be a bit of distance between that. So perhaps it's about, bridging that distance and showing people your actions on a day-to-day basis have real outcomes for your consumers. And then about attracting talent, we talk about kind of a say-do gap. What does an organization say it does, and then what does it actually do? Are they delivering an authentic message? And if you have an inauthentic message, when people enter your organization, they'll sniff that out, and if it does not align with the values they thought they were going to be buying into, they probably have other options, and you get retention issues with that. So say it again, it's that self-awareness. What are we saying we are doing, and are we actually doing that, and where is the gap? An interesting thing I've seen the Bank of England have done is with regard to skills that are expensive to buy on the market, so like data security, things like that, they're taking in school leavers and educating them up through the ranks, through college, through university. And those resources then become what they call stickier. They'll stay around longer, and you've built them up. So if you have retention issues or talent acquisition issues in niche areas, maybe think about that, bringing in people and educating them through your organization.
AIG, you mentioned when we spoke, it has been very successful in attracting and engaging people. Maybe it's because you're based in New York and it's easy there. But what are the 2 or 3 things that maybe the audience could take home and think about in their own organizations in terms of attraction?
So one of the things we've done is we've developed AIG University. And what we're doing is we're hiring individuals with 2 or 3 years of experience, or even more, someone that was in a completely different industry, doesn't know insurance, and we're bringing them in. And we're putting them through a 2-year apprenticeship program, if you will. So on-the-job learning, with mentoring, working with managers. We focused on veterans, and lately we've been thinking about some of our retirees that we know would like to come back into the workforce. And then I just learned recently, I read that JP Morgan has been focusing on women who have left the workforce to raise their children, and they're now coming back. So I'm going to try to beat them at the punch to look at that population. And then we're also looking at the differently abled to see, what are the skills and competencies that we can utilize to bring that population in. And then we've got a very robust employee resource group called ERGs. We've got 115 of them all around the world. And so we're really looking, they've been really great with some of, it's a very engaged group of colleagues, about 10,000 of them. And so we're looking to see how do we utilize that group to help us with things like retention, things like bringing in different talent into the organization. So we're looking at all the options that are available, and then what we'll do is we'll cull it down into 3 or 4 strategies. But so far, our AIG University, bringing in people from completely different industry, training them, mentoring them, and developing them has been really successful. And then our focus on veterans has also been really good. So we'll look at all the others and see which ones we go into, because we can't do it all in one suit, but which things will be successful or are successful, and then focus on those.
I think when we spoke at the top of the stairs, Vanessa, you were very interested in that, returning mothers coming back, our parents even coming back.
Yeah, and I think all of those, like thinking about where we can look for groups of talent that might, present opportunities. But yeah, and I love what Vievette has talked about, and Jenny also. I think something not to ever forget is that, people work for people, and notwithstanding the fact that Google is a great employer brand, when we see people that we really want to hire, then we will ensure that our best leaders will be in front of that person, and ensuring that we are closing down that person and ensuring that they're coming to Google. And so, that might mean that you just stay in contact with a candidate until they're absolutely over the line. And then actually when we believe in kind of, talent is a meritocracy, so we absolutely overinvest in the top 10%. And so even in terms of how we spend our time, we're spending it with the most talented people in the organisation, and really coaching and developing them, and looking to ensure that their potential is being unleashed. Because again, the difference in a really great person and spending a lot of time with them, versus all of the rest of our brilliant population, the return is quite exceptional.
And just on that, so if we take the 10% aside, in terms of retaining that other 90%, how do you retain your talent that isn't getting that kind of full-on development and support?
So again, to be clear, I've never spent as much time coaching as I like. Google's entire philosophy is a coaching-led philosophy. So you're spending all of your time helping people solve puzzles and solve problems. You're not one-to-ones are all coaching-led one-to-ones. So you spend an inordinate amount of time figuring that out, rather than sitting in board meetings looking at P&Ls or looking at what we're doing on the balance sheet. We're actually sitting with our people trying to figure it out. Because again, it's just a lot more agile way of getting things done. Obviously, we have a ton of governance that needs to happen also. But at the same time, I think, retaining people is easy when you have a great leader. Because again, they want to stay and they want to work for you, and they want to work for the organisation. But it's easy to say that Google is a very strong employer brand, but we also have people who have bad managers, and those bad managers equally leave. So again, the link between the employer brand and the leader that is with the person is absolutely intrinsic.
Great. So we have a couple of questions coming in from the audience. So I'll start with my favourite and the one closest to my heart, which is around AI and how it's going to impact on organisations. It might be obvious, but I will pass to Vanessa first.
Yeah. So it goes back to the point that Jenny made about people, and we're going to call them millennials. I don't call them millennials. This every generation calls the next generation something. But, so there are populations that do not want to do work that is mundane and that is not value creative. And I think the role of artificial intelligence is to ensure that we are finding what that piece of work is and finding ways to automate it so that we can apply our skills and our talent onto the biggest challenges that we have. And so for us, that is very much how we approach artificial intelligence, is look at the workflows, look at the processes that can and should be automated, and therefore apply people back into building far more value creative work. And you'll get higher, you'll get much more engaged employees. And also, this notion of work-life balance is actually quite important. So when I started work, I worked ridiculous hours because there wasn't processes, and we had to do lots of things. And I worked in a time where Excel was just starting. So we don't need to work like that anymore. We can use automation in order that people actually can have more balanced lives and actually be more fulfilled in their work.
Jenny, I think kind of following on that question, like what are you seeing for, both within the central bank, but also some of the financial services organisations you're dealing with, particularly the insurance, around AI and how it's impacting them?
So I suppose we talked about earlier on about the future of work when we were outside, and I was at a recent CPD event, we talked about this. And there are a number of skills that we need to really have a look at that are kind of maybe on the more mundane side of things, Vanessa, that could well become automated in the future. I think what needs to happen is a good horizon scanning going, where is this going? What skills might become automated? And then, okay, how do we deal with that? And we'll still have these people in our organization. What skills will they need in the future if they don't have, are not doing the mundane work? And it's about leadership development. It's about agility, change management. It's going to go much more into that personal development space and people development space. Machines will not do everything for us. You mentioned earlier, people work for people. It's about, like I said, building for the future, seeing what's on the horizon, and really focusing on the skill sets that will be needed in the future to continue to be successful, because you can be very, very quickly left behind in the fast-moving world.
A question, a topic we talked about at the very start, but a question that it often comes up is, what practical steps would you recommend to encourage diversity of thought and people challenging the status quo? And I'll put that to you first, Vievette.
Yeah. So can I just go to the AI, because I think when people think of insurance, AIG, 100 years old next December, they may not think that we're in that space. But we're actually similarly looking at all of our processes and end-to-end work, how we do it today. And we actually have bots that are doing some of that work for us today, and looking, as you said, at the mundane, but then also looking at our people and say, how do we upskill the people? And we're on today a huge body of work called professional standards, and we're looking at things like, the competencies, the skills, the job descriptions, everything that we do. A job description does not need to be 3 pages. A half a page will be good enough. And so we're looking at all of that to understand what are the skills and competencies, and how can we use AI to transform. So we're in it right now as well. So what was this question again around diversity? Sorry.
I
felt like I needed to get in there.
What practical steps would you recommend to encourage diversity of thought and people challenging the status quo while maintaining efficient teamwork?
Yeah. So some practical, one of the things, so at AIG, we have some programs around developing women. So we've got a program called WELI, Women Executive Leadership Program. And one of the things, I'm a graduate of the WELI program, and one of the things that, and it's a very simple thing, and you may not think about it, but many of you have been in meetings, right? And a female will have this great idea, and the leader, the manager, usually male, and please don't be offended, but that's usually how it is. We'll skip right over that person, and a guy will say the same thing, and then they say, "Oh, John, that was such a brilliant, great idea." And so, one of the things that we learned in WELI which is such a simple thing, is that as another female in the room, or as a supporter, a male, when that happens, for you to go back and say, you know what, I think Valarie had a great idea. Or the other thing happens, male, female, diversity, we'll skip over the diverse person who had the great idea and, give John again, "Oh, John, that was brilliant," when the person just said it. So one of the things is to redirect, If you see and I'm talking to the males in the audience because you can really make a difference. You see Valarie's trying to get her point in, and she can't get it because John is just really, bombastic and, really keep talking. You say, "Hey, I think Valarie has something to say." And believe it or not, how simple is that? The other thing is introverts versus extroverts. You have an extrovert just won't shut up. And then you have an introvert that is, very cerebral, thinking, got some great ideas. How about calling on that person? And I employ that right now in my meetings. I met with colleagues at the AIG office yesterday. And there was a millennial in the room, and she wasn't saying anything. And everybody else was, one person was like just asking tons of questions. And I turned to her and I said, "You know what? You've got something to say, because guess what? You are our future leader. In addition, you're our future customer, and I'd like to get your viewpoint." So I think just simple things like that can really make a difference in terms of diversity and inclusion, whether it's male, female, intergenerational. Bring the conversation in and bring others into the conversation so you do get that diversity of thought, because if you don't, there are people that will dominate that conversation and you won't get that diversity of thought.
And talks a bit to what Vanessa talked about earlier, hiring people who are like you, even though they might be different in the, gender, diversity, etc. It's encouraging that different thought. So I'm conscious of time, and there's one really interesting question here. There's lots of interesting questions, so no one feel insulted. But through the morning there was discussion around the pace of change and innovation and the need to keep moving forward. And and I would see it a lot in terms of human capital and the impact of that. And the question is, how can companies manage that change better and keep up with it? So Vanessa, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, so I work across lots of different verticals and across the UK and German markets and with lots of different companies. And change is something that, again, I think people are either saying, well, we're going to bring the change person into the room now, or we're going to appoint a change person onto the board. And this person is going to be our change evangelist, and they're going to either be our person who understands digital transformation, or they understand data, or they understand artificial intelligence, or whatever it's going to be. And again, that's just not going to be enough. I think understanding in your organization what are the elements that are absolutely changing, that are really changing, that are not trends, and how are you going to try and make your business fit 5 to 10 years out in order to embrace these areas. And these are kind of the conversations that we have with a lot of boards at the moment, because fundamentally, some of the existential things that are happening in terms of how users, how consumers are absorbing technology, how they're actually, even in Google, we find it very hard to keep up with how users use mobile phones, for example, and what they expect, voice technology, the level of automation that they're going to expect in their day-to-day. And so my big kind of, I think, call to action really is you just have got to, as a senior member of your organization, figure out what you're going to have to personally change yourself. Because to be honest with you, and it's not only technology, it's the mindsets of people who are starting organizations. If you look at where seed capital is going in Silicon Valley in China, or even across Europe, they're going into disruptive organizations that are looking at traditional industries and thinking about how they're going to get to the consumer quicker and faster. They don't have legacy systems, and they don't have capital-intense challenges that many of the traditional industries have. And you're going to have to figure out some of how you're going to drive change quicker and embrace the change as the leader in the organization.
Great, thanks very much. I love one of the questions, which is, there's an elephant in the room. This is to quote it: 4 females sitting on a panel in front of a audience that's mostly male and grey-haired. There's no insult to anyone. But I think just, with 45 seconds to go, what is the one thing that each of you would recommend from a talent perspective that those in the audience should think about and act upon? So one thing, Vievette?
I think you have to think about diversity. It will be the game changer. And, and depending on where you are in the world, diversity may mean something very different. And I worked for the Swiss bank previously, and diversity, you're in Switzerland, right? How much diversity? I usually joke that the only diversity in Switzerland at that time was myself and Tina Turner. Because that's the only other diverse person I ever saw in Zurich, in Utlihof, but Tina and myself. But I went back a year ago, and it was unbelievable. But diversity at the time in Switzerland meant that there were females that were of childbearing years that were leaving the workspace. And what it meant, diversity that there meant at that time, is that we needed to create job sharing opportunities for them to continue to work. And so that's what diversity meant at that time. So we're on a journey right now trying to figure out, what does diversity mean? We're in 86 countries and zones. So what does diversity mean in all of those places? And figuring it out, because at the end of the day, we're in the human capital business. No matter what we do, we need people. And figuring out what works and what's appropriate for that area is going to be a game changer for us.
Great, thanks. As we're having very flashy lights, and I believe a lasso is going to come and pull me out. In 1 or 2 words, Jenny, what would you say?
Vievette stole my one. So I'll go really boring. Technology, skills and awareness. Risk management, being very boring, is the responsibility of everybody in an organisation. Everybody needs to have an awareness of those risks that technology brings to it. Varying degrees of expertise is needed at different areas in the organisation, but that's what I would focus on.
Thanks. And lastly, Vanessa?
Yeah, I think the talent that, we talk about the war for talent, but I think the talent that you have probably already exists in your organisation. I think it's actually how you lead through that talent that will make a difference. So if you actually start thinking about how you give all of the smart people that work for you very clear challenges and puzzles to solve, I think you'll find yourself have a different environment and a different workspace.
Great. Vanessa, Jenny, Vievette, thank you very much for your input. Thank you to everyone for your questions.